Welcome to the smoke pit. As we sit down in the smoke pit to enjoy more of each other's strange stories, I would like to quickly set the stage for this episode. In the last smoke pit episode, we listened to the story of an Air Force veteran, Xavier, and his numerous experiences with paranormal entities, what he believes were aliens, events that even he isn't entirely certain were either real or part of a recurring nightmare. But then there were things that happened during his waking reality, unexplained marks or wounds on his skin, or both he and his father inexplicably sharing similar nightmares of alien visitation in the same night. In this episode, we will continue to explore the strange nature of dreams, another instance where what happens in someone's subconscious mind appears to bleed over into his waking reality, which then gives his vivid dreams the appearance of being something else. When speculating on strange encounters or observations, such as with ghosts, strange beings, or UFOs, I've noticed that many of us can only shrug and admit that we don't know what it was that we saw, or what it meant, if anything. And perhaps over time these events fade into memory, or we determinedly make a conscious effort to convince ourselves that what we saw was nothing unusual, or perhaps just an illusion, our mind playing tricks on us. But then when these experiences happen for a second time, or a third time, it becomes much more difficult for us to forget about what we saw, or to ignore its possible meaning. So what if we had a dream about something terrifying, and then later, when we were wide awake, we saw something we thought was impossible. Something that we saw in our nightmare. What would we make of it? What will we do about it? This next story is just such an occurrence, the account of a married man with children, now in his late 40s, a recent early retiree from his position as a bank operations manager. His name is Chad. He writes, "Before having these experiences of my own, beginning in 2019, I would have undoubtedly considered someone like myself to be completely out of their mind crazy. I would have thought anyone who said that they saw a UFO or Bigfoot or anything like that was, making it up to get attention or something. But now, the combination of these experiences I'm about to describe makes it very hard for me to ignore that they may be somehow related to one another, and that they aren't just random events. And while I admit they might mean nothing, my concern is that they do mean something. But I just have no idea what that is. I have theories, yes, but none that I'm certain about. And of course, I don't expect most people to even believe me, because there was a time when I wouldn't have believed them. I just want to relay these experiences and allow others to decide what to take from them or discard from my accounts. The first event took place on the morning of August 21st, 2019. While I was sleeping that night, I had an unusual dream. In my dream, I was in my car with my family, and we were driving down the road at night. There were trees on both sides, and the night sky had a reddish hue to it. As the car began to crest over the top of a hill, I could see these red and blue lights coming down from something on the horizon. My oldest son then said, "Pop, I want to go see the red and blue lights." What I then said to him in this dream was that these were alien crafts, and that these aliens were here to deceive mankind into believing they were here to help us. So instead of traveling further towards the lights, I veered the car off to the left, up a side road that rose in elevation, overlooking a town with several large buildings towards my right. And there, sitting perfectly still, hovering above the buildings, was a very large circular craft that was gray in color. It wasn't hiding itself. It clearly wanted the people to see it. And more surprising to me were the multitudes of people that gathered around below it to welcome these alien beings. I could see that the people were very excited, almost like people at a music concert. Then this craft shot a beam of yellow light onto one of the rooftops directly in front of it, which produced a huge entity, white in color, and I knew it was going to attack the multitudes of people. I then immediately woke up and sat up in bed. I don't know if it's important, but I can't really give a good description of the huge entity because I woke up suddenly while it was still materializing on the roof of the building. My best description would be that it looked like a strange, large predator-type animal. Its body was big, bearish, or maybe wolfish. Its face also bearish, but maybe more like a lion. I'd later find out that there is a cryptid that looks something like this, called the Ozark Howler. I'm not saying that's what it was, but after seeing a drawing of one, I'd say that is as close as I can find to anything that looks like what I saw in the dream. But whatever it was supposed to be, the entity was completely white in color. Like most weird dreams everyone probably has, I think I completely forgot about it after I woke up. I just went about my morning routine and didn't give it a second thought. I was driving my oldest son to school that morning, and he was taking a long time to get ready, so I shouted at him to tell him to hurry up or he's going to be late. For those of you parents with teenagers, the response I got back was expected. He spent the rest of the morning mad at me and ignoring me, avoiding eye contact and staring down at his phone as we got into the car and pulled out of the driveway. The road leading out of my small subdivision sort of snaked its way out to the highway, and so I didn't have a clear line of sight to the intersection until we had driven down the street a bit. But when I could see the intersection, I looked up above the tall pine trees across the highway and saw a craft, a UFO, just above the treetops. It was just floating there, this football-shaped, battleship gray-colored thing, hovering completely motionless. And because my window was down and I didn't hear anything, silently over the trees. In the middle of it was a black circular spot, or maybe an opening of some kind. It was probably about the size of 2 minivans if you put them end to end. And it was blurry, or rather there was some kind of haziness that surrounded the entire thing, almost like it was trying to conceal itself. The haze was kind of like looking through gasoline fumes, or when you look at the air just above the ground on a hot day. I did end up watching a UFO documentary that was done a few years ago, Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers. In that documentary, I heard Bob Lazar, the physicist who broke the story about Area 51 back in 1989. He explained this haze as being a gravitational, heart-shaped envelope that is emitted from its anti-gravitational generator that allows it to hover motionless. According to his conclusions, it envelops the craft and distorts gravity waves. And maybe that's a point to make here. With documentaries like that as a reference, sure, I can talk about what I saw now, in retrospect. But as odd as seeing something like that clearly was for me, or anyone else, as I was driving down my street, I certainly wish I had taken a picture of it, or even had the thought to do so. For some reason, I don't really think my mind registered what I was seeing at the time, you know? And with his face still buried in his phone, my son didn't look up and see it. It's difficult to describe the experience. You know, my mind trying to make sense of something that doesn't really look like anything I've ever seen. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. You know, like, is it a satellite dish? No. It's like, imagine you're driving down the road and you see a 75-foot tall man run across the road in front of you and then disappear. And what would you think? Would your immediate reaction be to take a picture? You know, how do you deal with something like that? It's not supposed to be possible. This was just something I couldn't believe. As much as I knew at the time, this thing wasn't even supposed to exist. It wasn't until sometime afterward that I realized that I'd probably gone into shock. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And so I just kept driving. And by the time I got to the intersection, because it was sitting further back over the trees, the object had become obscured by the treetops. I'm sure anyone would ask why no one else on the highway could see it. And I don't even know if they couldn't, but that's possibly why. You'd have to be driving down my street to see it from that vantage point. When I got to the intersection, I was more focused on the traffic I was merging into. I just turned left, like I always do, heading towards my son's school. But as I turned onto the highway, I remember checking my mirrors to see if I could still see it. Or maybe I was worried it was going to start following us. It didn't. And as we drove down the highway, at no point could I see it in any of my mirrors. After dropping my son off, I headed back home. Turning back onto my street, I looked back above those pine treetops and saw that the craft was no longer there. So when I got into the house, I sat down by myself and tried to figure out what the hell had just happened. Did I imagine this? And then as I'm sitting there thinking, I suddenly remembered the dream that I'd woken up from that morning about an alien craft and aliens deceiving mankind, saying they were going to help us, only to then attack us or hurt us somehow. But that was it. And what was I supposed to do with this information? Tell someone? Tell them what? But I couldn't shake this feeling I had, like I was supposed to understand what seeing that UFO meant. I will admit, given the context of the thing I just seen, that terrified me because it seemed very clear to me that my dream and that thing were related. They had to be. What else was I supposed to think? I think I'm a rational guy, but man, I got a wife, 2 kids, and I had this horrible thought that it's as if this thing was telling me, we know where you live. We can get to you or your family at any time. So keep your mouth shut about the dream and move on. And at that time, I decided to do exactly that. I told no one, not my wife, my family, my closest friends. I made this decision not necessarily because I thought I would be ridiculed or that my family or friends wouldn't believe me, but out of fear for my family's safety. I ultimately decided that I would take this encounter with me to the grave. And then I spent the next several weeks trying to downplay the whole thing, to write it off as, something I just imagined. But then I saw it again. The Smoke Pit will be right back after these messages. And now, back to the stories. It was 6 weeks after the first sighting, now on October 4th, my oldest son's birthday. And I promise I am not making this up to make this all seem more dramatic. What freaked me out was when I remembered that it was my oldest son in the dream I had. It was my son who said in the dream that he wanted to go see the red and blue lights. And now I'm seeing this thing near my house again on his birthday. This time I saw it as I was driving home, after dropping him and my youngest son off at each of their schools. So when I drove home, I was coming back from the other direction, about to turn left onto my street. It wasn't sitting over the trees on my right, where I had first seen it. Now it was further west, maybe less than a mile from my home. But since these objects presented themselves in a completely different manner, I do not know if they were the same craft or 2 different ones. But at a distance, it certainly looked similar to the first one. I'm asking myself, why is this here? And yes, the thought occurred to me to drive closer to it, to keep driving down the highway towards it. But then I thought, hell no, there is no way I'm doing that. So instead of doing that or pulling off the highway onto my street, I just pulled off immediately to the right side of the turning lane and sat in my car, watching this thing for approximately 6 minutes. I used the clock on my dashboard to time it. But like before, it didn't move at all. Just hovered there, looking like a bright light off in the distance. At this point, I'm thinking that other people have to be seeing this, right? It's right there. And so at that point, I finally decided to take a picture of it before turning onto my street and going home. Before going inside, I took my phone back out to look at the photo I'd taken. I was honestly hoping that by taking a picture of it, rather than having a picture to prove that I saw something, I was going to pull out my phone and there would be nothing in the photo. And then I could prove to myself that I was just imagining all this. But nope, there it was. The photo quality isn't great because it was a good distance away, but there it was. Maybe I was being paranoid, but at that point I knew I had to say something to my wife, to my family. Because God knows what, if something happened to me, I thought that at least my family should know what I'd seen. I knew how it must look to them, like I had lost my mind, so at first I thought they might have been waiting for a punchline, but they quickly seemed to get that I was being serious. And they were all very supportive. They know that I'm a man of my word, and they all tried to offer possible explanations as to what this could all mean. I had once thought that I wished my son had also seen the UFO, since he was sitting in the car with me, but looking down at his phone the entire time. But I've had others tell me that it's probably best he didn't see it, for his sake. That it would be too difficult for him to have to deal with at that age, and I do have to agree with them. I have had one additional dream about these crafts, my wife being in the dream with me, and it was much more personal than the first dream, and it's not something I really want to share. I still look up above those pine trees every time I drive down my street. There is a house just off the highway, approximately below the spot where the craft would have been hovering, and I have thought about going over and knocking on their door once or twice, but then I really can't imagine that would turn out so well. Imagine being the guy who answers the door and I'm standing there asking about UFOs. Could you imagine? So, I never bothered. Look, I by no means consider myself a prophet, a psychic, gifted, or hell, even a very interesting person for that matter, but, well, here's my theory. Take it or leave it. I have now concluded that it had nothing to do with the pine trees or the location, but that craft had everything to do with a stern warning. I know this is going to make me sound even stranger, but I now feel as if all these UFO sightings and other events around the world, the media, our government and military now acknowledging the existence of these things after denying them for decades, it's as if the barrier between this dimension and another dimension is thinning, and these things are now crossing over into ours in greater numbers. And what I mean is that it's like they're entering our dimension via portals, rather than traveling from distant planets or galaxies. But look, I know it sounds crazy, but that's what I've come up with. Ultimately, my faith is in God, not in man, or aliens, or dimensional entities. I really couldn't say for certain what any of this means, or whether I'm supposed to warn anyone about an event, like the one in my dream, something that's supposed to happen in the future. I welcome anyone else's theories, questions, observations, and outright scrutiny. But whatever you think about me or my story, I do not believe it's my responsibility to convince anyone to believe anything. All I can think to do is to at least share the story and see what comes of it. So, what are we to make of Chad's story? Compared to many of the other subscribers' stories shared in the Smoke Pit, Chad's story is much more detailed, not unlike Xavier's story about possibly experiencing actual alien visitations. In my mind, their stories are those that certainly create the opportunity for much more skepticism, and therefore I thought it demanded a lot more verification of their credibility, both out of respect for them and for you as my audience. Anyone can email me a bizarre story, but Do I actually look into the stories I get? Or do I just create these videos without any amount of due diligence? Well, I'm not sure if it makes the story any more interesting for you, but for those who are interested, I did want to share with you the research, or call it an investigation, I did into Chad's story, at least as far as verifying as much of it as I possibly could. But rather than making this into a 40-minute episode, my analysis of Chad's story will be featured in a separate upcoming video titled Believing the Unbelievable. I don't plan to make a habit of presenting my personal analysis for every story, but I suppose I thought it would be the right thing to do in this case. In case you were curious about how I approach these personal stories shared by viewers. In closing, the question remains, what are we to make of these experiences? How would we reconcile what occurred in a dream we had with something we later experience in reality? Would we pay any attention to it, or write it off as something inconsequential? Well, Chad is by no means alone in asking this strange question. His story will not be the last we hear in the smoke pit on this subject of dreams and waking reality, and more of these stories will be featured in future episodes. Thank you all for watching. If you also have a story to share with us, you are welcome to post it in the comments section or to email me at wartimestories.yt@gmail.com. I do work alone on the channel, so if you have already emailed me or you are planning to, I will get back to you as quickly as I can. But whether in dreams or in reality or somewhere in between, I will see you in the next episode. Hey guys, thanks again for sticking around for the credits. Since there will be a secondary video for Chad's story, I won't have any closing thoughts on his story to offer you here. There was a personal experience I had with a dream that I wanted to share, but I couldn't really find a way to share it without making the credits really long. And on that note, I might have to make some creative changes moving forward, and I will address that in a short video titled Upcoming Changes to the Channel, which will be posted shortly after this episode. As always, I'm very open to hearing any suggestions you might have to offer me other than what I've been able to come up with, so feel free to drop those in the comments section of that video. Thanks again for watching. Thank you for the great feedback, and as always, a sincere thank you to my patrons and YouTube channel members for making this work possible. Like our corpsmen and medics on the battlefield, this channel could not survive without your incredible support. If you would like to support the channel as well, visit the channel's homepage and look for the Join button to become a channel member. If you would prefer to become a patron, there is a link to the channel's Patreon here and in the description section of each video on the channel. Because of the structure of Patreon's tiered benefit platform, I can at least offer you a small physical token of my appreciation, a challenge coin, along with doing my utmost to acknowledge your support through other various exclusive benefits. Thank you for your support, thank you for your time, and I will see you in the next episode.